The Primavera, or Allegory of Spring, was painted by Sandro Botticelli sometime in 1477 or 1478. 500 years later, the painting was restored and cleaned. Today, we see it as never before in living memory. A work that time had misted over, turned yellow and stained. Now, the restorer's skill has endowed it with a totally new dimension, freeing it from the clutches of the past centuries. This is what it looks like now, and this is how it was up to a short time ago. The hands of one of the three graces after being restored. Before, they looked like this. The gauze had lost its transparency. Now it floats light and airy in the breeze. The flowers were dulled by a uniform patina. Now they bloom again in the grass of the meadow over which waft diaphanous veils, and on which dance figures that had also suffered the ruthless touch of time. The difference is astounding. Like this before, like this after the restoration. Flowers that it seems one could pick. Fruit that invites to be eaten. What made possible this second springtime of one of the world's greatest masterpieces, the Primavera? The restoration laboratory founded in Florence at the end of the 16th century by the Medici. These skilled technicians and experts devote their efforts to rescuing works of art from decay and the threat of destruction. One day, in 1981, a large crate was brought to the restoration laboratory, which for the last 10 years or so has been housed in an ancient fortress built for the defense of Florence. A large and most precious crate. It contains a work of art that for 500 years has thrilled and fascinated all those who gaze at it. The painting, hidden by the sturdy crate, is going to be subjected to intense studies and analyses, after which it will be treated and worked upon, as have been hundreds of other works belonging to different periods and by many different artists, in order to restore it to its original splendor. A task calling for the utmost precision and scientific commitment. Today, the restoration of works of art is based on ultra-modern technology and inspired by a much stricter aesthetic approach than was the case in the past. For once, these are not mere abstractions. We are going to see how the principles and the methods of present-day restoration operate in practice, instant by instant, phase by phase, starting from the moment when the wooden panel, painted by Sandro Botticelli for Duke Lorenzo di Pier Francesco de' Medici, the young cousin of his more famous namesake, the Lorenzo known as Il Magnifico, the Magnificent, will be placed on this specially constructed easel. That wooden panel will become the focus for the dedicated care and attention of those who have taken on the responsibility for bringing to the surface the fullness of the beauty hidden within the painting. Footsteps through flowered meadows not far from Florence take us back to a distant springtime in the second half of the 15th century. It may well be that it was while walking over flowers like these that the young painter, Sandro Botticelli, found in this fantasy of colors his first idea for what was to be his greatest work. Experiencing the spring, so as to interpret it. To discover in its life-imbued colors and shapes the essence of eternity. The spring, the season that represents the impulse and flowing of a vital force. A reminder that the artistic civilization which flowered in 15th century Florence was much more than a period in the city's cultural history. It was the unique expression of a new conception of the world and of man. The second half of the 15th century, the most creative period of the Florence of the Medici. In those years, a young man of great sensitiveness was set to work in the workshop of a highly skilled artisan. One of those dedicated craftsmen such as still exist in Florence. It was the workshop of a goldsmith. That was the usual way at that time for a budding artist to acquire the basic skills of draftsmanship, sculpture, and painting. And so it was that Sandro Botticelli learned his trade with Masso Finiguera in the workshop frequented by Antonio Pollaiolo and Filippo Lippi, who perhaps were his masters. The ruling powers of the time, in other words, the Medici family, had their villas outside Florence. They were sumptuous residences. Some were specially designed and built for them. Others were adapted from older castles. At the peak of the long history of this great family, there was not a member of it who did not have a grandiose villa. In the 17th century, the Grand Duke Ferdinando had them all depicted in a series of lunettes, a kind of catalogue of the family's estates and country houses. He assembled this collection of portraits of villas in the Villa del Artimino, better known as La Ferdinanda. It was for another aristocratic residence, such as this, the Villa di Castello, that Sandro Botticelli painted his allegory of spring. It is more than likely that when he painted it, he had before his eyes the spring flowers blooming in the park of the villa, as recent studies have suggested. A leading botanist has listed all the wild flowers and grasses to be found in springtime in the grounds and the surrounding countryside. A lengthy project that involved classification of many botanic families and varieties and cataloging them according to flower color, petal formation, and leaf structure. And then the same work was carried out on the flowers and plants to be found in Botticelli's Primavera. The research conducted by Guido Moggi of Florence University lasted 1 year. He was able to distinguish 500 separate specimens in the painted meadow. There are 190 flowering plants in the picture, 138 of which have been identified.
Numero 42, ancora un altro viola subito sopra, il numero 186.
Thanks to this exhaustive research, it has now been established that the flowering period corresponding to Botticelli's plants is from March to the end of April. In most cases, the plants are depicted faithfully and with extreme realism. In other cases, Botticelli structured the leaves more simply than in actual fact to meet the requirements of his composition. Umberto Baldini, who supervised all the restoration operations, is discussing with Guido Moggi the results of his botanical research. With them is one of the restorers, Ornella Casazza. They are commenting on the garland of roses entwined around the Primavera's waist, and also on more humble wildflowers with complicated names. This, for example, is a Tussilaga farfara, which flowers in February and March when the snow melts. Similarly, nearly all the flowers and plants depicted in the painting can be identified as flowering in springtime in the area of the villa for which Botticelli was commissioned to paint the Primavera. It is clear that Botticelli's intention was to catch a definite moment in time. The painting is a depiction of what one might call the quintessence of spring. The quintessence of spring, the rebirth of nature, as the theme of a work about which the art historian and painter Vasari wrote in 1550, Venus, whom the three graces make bloom, to denote the spring. Another quotation from the 19th century English critic Walter Pater. To gaze upon this masterpiece of Botticelli is to surmise the lofty peak which, in the history of human culture, belongs by right to Italian art. If it had been for no other motive than this, the task of restoring this work of art would still have called for the highest possible degree of commitment. And the first step was to photograph the painting before treatment. One reason for this was that subsequently it would be possible to compare the newly cleaned areas of the panel with others left temporarily in their original state, thus establishing the degree of deterioration with precision. Next, another photographic operation known as tangent or raking light photography. This technique provides a relief map of imperfections and irregularities in the paint surface, even the most undetectable. One of the faces painted by Botticelli for his Primavera half a millennium later. This is what it looks like with raking light and after cleaning. The raking light method also reveals the relief effect of various details of the painting.
La diretta, sì, magari in espansione in maniera che si vede meglio se ci sono quelle sostanze grasse.
In the meantime, a number of flakes of paint have been taken to the chemical laboratory.
Perché sarebbe meglio guardarlo con luce polarizzata, questo, addirittura in fluorescenza.
Stratigraphical analyses of pigments, binders, and varnishes. With the aid of this technique, we are enabled to penetrate the world of the infinitely small. The impression we have is of being near to the mysterious secret of the creative process. Other preliminary examinations concern the condition of the panel, or rather panels, on which Botticelli painted his Primavera. Experts in wood conservation are entrusted with the task. And there are obvious traces of past damage by woodworm. This is a butterfly-shaped reinforcing plug that is still intact and perfectly functional after 5 centuries. These, together with 2 cross battens, hold firmly in place the 8 boards, 3 centimeters thick, which make up the painting's wooden support. Only those plugs which might tend to force the boards out of shape have been replaced with replicas, also made from old poplar wood. In the spacious Florentine restoration workshop, ancient methods dating back over half a millennium still survive then, as effective as they were in the past, but flanked now by the most up-to-date technology. The screening methods include fluorescence examination, reflectography, black and white X-ray radiography, and color X-ray coding. As if by magic, ultraviolet fluorescence examination turns Botticelli's figures into ghostly outlines of ectoplasm. There is no miracle involved. Quite simply, with the aid of applied science, it is possible to identify previous restoration interventions, the existence of oxidized varnishes on the paint layer, and areas without pigment that the naked eye cannot detect. These are some stages in the screening carried out on the face of Mercury. This is how it looked under raking light examination, and in succeeding moments illuminated by ultraviolet light, and the final appearance of the face after cleaning. All these tests and examinations, especially when interpreted comparatively, help to build up as complete a documentation as possible on the condition of the work.
Anche qua sembra di scorgere una forma abbastanza così difficile da interpretare, forma rotonda che si individua al di sotto della...
The use of infrared reflectography in real time, with the image obtained projected on a monitor, reveals more secrets concealed within the painting. It becomes possible to distinguish elements that no longer appear in the finished composition.
Prendiamo l'immagine e ci spostiamo sulla figura del Mercurio. Ecco, ci spostiamo quest'anno. C'è un sospetto sentimento nel braccio del Mercurio.
Si vede il rigo segnato più all'interno e poi nella redazione finale invece...
Ecco, magari per andare a indicare la zona...
For example, here, Botticelli had first planned and painted an arm in a different position from the one it has today.
Ecco, sposti un momento.
These are the artist's second thoughts, and thanks to modern technology, we are enabled to retrace the phases of his inspiration. Further examinations necessitated the placing of the Primavera horizontally on trestles for several days. It is covered and protected by extra light sheets of transparent plastic, on top of which a kind of grid is placed. This is in preparation for one of the most complex examinations of all, X-ray radiography of the whole work. A beam of X-rays passes through the painting and its support onto radiographic film, making an impression on it according to the differing degrees of absorption. The radiographic record thus produced will be of great help to the restorers in the delicate work of cleaning. The red and green markings indicate elements that are not visible to the naked eye. The zones marked in green were disclosed by X-ray examination, and the red zones by reflectography.
A livello dei pentimenti, ecco, qui si può apprezzare meglio.
An immense X-ray photograph, one of the biggest in the world, made of a painting.
L'insieme della radiografia del dipinto ha messo in evidenza alcuni pentimenti, soprattutto per quanto riguarda la figura della Venere, leggermente scottata.
Umberto Baldini and Maurizio Seracini, who supervised this difficult operation, are talking about the strips of canvas glued along the joints between the boards making up the support for the picture, which were revealed by the radiography. and about the cracks in the paint layer corresponding to the seams between the boards. In the center of the giant X-ray photograph, there she is, the leading lady of the painting, with her eternal smile. The smile of the Primavera, seen in the changing light cast by the various examinations. Stage by stage, up to the color X-ray coding, and culminating in the end result of the total work of restoration. An amazing metamorphosis, whose final stages were painstaking and delicate. After the marvels of technology, the no less miraculous marvel of manual skill takes over. No machine can substitute experience, sensitiveness, and personal ability. Instruments may help, but the hand is ultimately alone in its intimate relationship with the work of art.
Il tratteggio, acquerello.
In the conclusive stage, the restorers use the special technique of chromatic selection in painting, adopted in accordance with the new philosophy of restoration followed by the Florentine laboratory. After the application of plaster in the areas lacking in color and the subsequent delicate operation of leveling and removing the excess plaster, the gaps are covered over with brush strokes of watercolor that do not attempt to imitate or falsify. What is essential is to achieve a convincing correspondence with the existing paint layer. Around the completely restored allegory of spring, gather all the technicians and experts, together with their pupils, who have contributed months of intense and dedicated care to the painting. The significance of the achievement is commented on by Professor Baldini, who led this specialized team in a unique assignment that, as we have seen, fused together a great and ancient tradition and sophisticated avant-garde techniques. As we saw very clearly when it was first brought here, the painting had become virtually illegible because of the dirt encrusted on its surface. The elements that have become legible now are obviously not new. They're new to our eyes, but in actual fact correspond to the artist's conception. Take the figure of Zephyr, for example. It looked more like an infernal demon because of the yellowing effect that had reduced its splendid shades of blue to an icy greenish tonality. Now, on the other hand, it is the same color as the blue of the sky and of the mountains. Consequently, it gives much more the impression of a vision that is unearthly in the sense of celestial. And then, the glimpses of the landscape in the background that have reappeared, for instance, between these two trees, have the effect of changing the significance of the work. It's no longer merely a group of allegorical figures depicted in a formal setting. Now, they have a plasticity and an impact that are enhanced by this penetration of light. And above all, by the extension of the light in space beyond the group of trees. The structural analysis we can make of the painting today is thus more precise. We can identify the great arc which embraces the whole scene, and the rhythmical elements uniting the whole composition, the whole narration, in a kind of musical module.
un'intera narrazione.
It's an extraordinary work, a work that represents one of the highest points in the entire history of art.
Dell'arte di tutti i tempi. Forse,
Perhaps, I think, in the light of my almost 40 years' experience in the field of works of art and of restoration, it is the most beautiful painting I have seen, and on which we have all worked to give it back its original appearance. At last, the masterpiece of Botticelli has returned to make its daily encounters with the public. Once again, the magic that emanates from the flower-bedecked panel can do its subtle work. Once more, it is possible to establish a personal and intimate relationship with the figures who populate the sacred wood. A bond of joyfulness, the joy that fills everyone when the new light awakens nature every year. The same light as vibrates in us standing before this fascinating painting, and which also vibrates in a smile from the past. From a period, that of humanism, which, through its excited research, opened up countless new roads to man, but without an ultimate goal. In this painting, the long seeking of humanism, it has been said, was transformed into lyrical inquietude, an inquietude redeemed by the higher balance of an intellectual harmony. That same harmony, as each and every one of us seeks in vain, we can find given expression here, with gentleness, strength, and natural vitality. Just as Sandro Botticelli set out to symbolize it in this work, when he painted it for us all in that far-off spring in the 15th century.